Okay, last session. So in this session, we're going to take a look at what's new in ArcGIS Enterprise. And I'm going to go back to the last couple of releases that happened earlier in the year, and that's 10.7 and 10.7.1. So the pre-release of 10.8 is actually out right now, so you can get your hands on that and give it a go. And I'll name drop some of the new features that are in 10.8 during this presentation. And the other thing I just wanted to draw attention to is that ArcGIS Enterprise is a really big product now. So if you take into account all of the server roles, you had a bunch of new raster functions in the image server role. There was a bunch of new functions in the geoanalytics role. There was some new connectors in GeoEvent server, some new stability and monitoring improvements in that server role, and then a brand new notebook server role as well. I'm not going to talk about any of that. I'm going to talk about what I think of as the core ArcGIS Enterprise product. And by that, I mean good old ArcGIS server, the underlying ArcGIS data store, and then the portal component. That is now what we think of as the base stack of ArcGIS Enterprise. Starting off with alignment to what's already happening in ArcGIS Online. So at 10.7, we now have the introduction of the new ArcGIS user types. Now, each of these user types includes a set of privileges that allow you to define who has viewing, editing, and publishing capabilities. And now they've also separated out these application bundles that allow you as a portal administrator to decide, as a new user joins your portal, what privileges do they need, but also what applications do you want to allocate to them as well. And really this came about because it allows you to be more cost effective with your named users. So in particular, it was that field worker where you might have a number of users out in the field using apps like Survey123 or Collector, and maybe not all of them needed to come back to the office and create their own maps and apps and do analysis. You can now essentially take them from what used to be a level 2 and actually downgrade them to a field worker. So during an upgrade, if you were on 10.5 or 10.6 and you had the level 1 named users, these map across to the viewer user type. And then if you had level 2s, they map across to that creator user type. Relationship mapping. This allows you to combine two separate attributes within your data to essentially get these two separate color ramps and bring them together to create this nice spectrum of colors to allow you to understand where the patterns are on their own, where they kind of come together, and where they're high and low. So it's easy to explain this with an example. These are work orders that have been aggregated to some territories. So right now we're looking at the estimated cost that's been averaged out in this purple color ramp. This is the exact same layer, but using a color renderer on a different attribute, which is the total cost. And what I want to do, I could sort of flick between them and eyeball the difference, but beats the point. Let me show you this new smart mapping style. So jumping in, I would change, add in the two attributes. So estimated cost, total cost. Smart mapping kicks in and just shows me the relevant renderers to use against this, of which relationship mapping is what I want to use. I can choose for some color brewer approved contrasting symbology. So in this case, I quite like this one. You can change the grid size, you can change the classification scheme to get as granular as you need to be. And in reality, what this client needed to know about was the work orders where they estimated low, but the actual work orders ended up being a lot higher cost. So straight away, you can start to see that these blue areas are the ones that they need to look out at. And temporarily, as this changes over time, was there particular catchments that were sort of continuously being over what they originally estimated. Okay, so any of you that may be an ArcGIS server administrator, you'll be very familiar with these ArcSoc processes. If you're not, just bear with me, I'll try and explain why this is important. So before 10.7, when you published a service, it had a dedicated capacity, and there was actually a one-to-one relationship between a SOC process and then the service definition that you published. So by default, every new service that you published had at least a minimum of one of these services spun up, just listing out for new requests from users hitting it. So even if no one was hitting that service, it would still suck up a good 100 megabytes of memory from that machine. So 50 services, 5 gig of RAM just gone, even without anyone hitting that instance. It was actually very common for our professional services team to notice that organizations that needed to publish a large number of services from an enterprise geodatabase would actually encounter memory issues before the CPU bottleneck. That is until now. So at 10.7, we now have shared instances. This might seem a little bit dull, but to me, it's actually my favorite new feature since Portal became part of ArcGIS Enterprise, and let me try and explain. So this allows a one-to-many relationship between a very special type of SOC process and your service definition. So this special SOC process can actually handle requests from a number of services that are hitting it. This special SOC process actually sits in a shared instance kind of swimming pool where there's a number of these special SOC processes handling requests from the services that you've put into this shared instance mode. When you publish a new service and you assign it to use this new shared instance mode, it has a much lower impact on memory, and it can do this because there's no dedicated set of SOC processes spun up specifically for that service. All of the requests are handled by the pool. As the administrator, you can specify the default instance type for your ArcGIS server site. I noticed at 10.7 this is actually still defaulted to be dedicated. You can change it to shared to encourage your publishers to make use of it. At 10.8, the default is actually shared. You can also specify the number of how many of those special SOC processes are going to be in that shared instance pool, and that's on a machine-wide basis within your site. If you select shared instance mode for a new service, these other settings are grayed out, so you don't get the option to tune the service, the minimum and maximum instances, or the timeout settings. That's all removed from you, and that's, again, by design. That's now handled by the pool. When should you do this? So services that receive low traffic, and by low traffic, anything that's really less than 1 request a minute, isolate these and consider moving them to this new shared instance mode. And your service stats in ArcGIS Server will help you pinpoint those. It's been designed at mapping and feature services, so if you've got OGC capabilities or editing, that's totally fine. But if you've got network analysis layers or utility networks or custom service object interceptors and extensions, geoprocessing, geocoding services, or if you've published with ArcMap, all of that still needs to be done with dedicated instances or making use of ArcGIS Pro to republish those services. And also, dedicated instances are still very, very useful for your high volume services. So if you need predictable and consistent performance, dedicated instances are still where you can actually reserve some bandwidth from that ArcGIS server site for those particular services. If you can take anything away from this entire presentation, in my opinion, it's this. So shared instances, if you start to make use of this, you can essentially raise the ceiling of what you can get out of your existing ArcGIS server. You can essentially publish more services. Bulk publishing. Now, this was designed to help quickly get your GIS content out to the rest of your organization. And for me, my knee-jerk reaction when I saw this was, okay, well, I've got a geodatabase with 100 layers. Sure, this allows me to publish that 100 layers to services, but what about the impact on my ArcGIS server? Isn't the memory going to have an issue? This bulk publishing makes use of that shared instance mode by default, so it has a much less memory impact on your ArcGIS server site. In fact, we've been working with a customer that successfully bulk published 400 layers from an enterprise geodatabase to an ArcGIS server, and a lot of those layers were pretty complex geometries and quite large data sets as well. Again, going back to the why would you do this? It's quicker than doing it one by one. Self-service mapping is definitely a thing now, but you've got to ask yourself how much of your spatial data is actually being served up to the rest of the organization so they can access it through items in the portal. Bulk publishing will help you get your content out to people. Some of you also make use of a publication geodatabase workflow. This process allows you to synchronize that with the portal so that you see the items appear and disappear as that changes in your geodatabase. And also a lot of you are shifting your environments to the cloud. If you move the geodatabase to the cloud, you need to then publish services so that your clients that might still be back on-prem can actually access that content. Here we have 10 layers. Now, these have been migrated to an enterprise geodatabase, in this case, Azure SQL. This particular instance, metadata has actually been enabled at the geodatabase level, and I always think this is the best way. Do it at the bottom, and it flows all the way up through the platform. In the portal, we now have the option to add a new item type, and that is a data store item. Now, this could be a file server. It could be a cloud storage, such as Azure Blob Storage or Esri. In this case, we're going to register a database. So this database, we could either tap in the credentials of a connection string credentials through this GUI, or we could actually import an existing SDE connection file that you've created in ArcGIS Desktop. Now, do read the help on the privileges that this file should have, or this user should have, or more likely what privileges it shouldn't have. The less privileges, the better from a security standpoint. It then registers this data store in the portal. You choose which GIS server you want to register it against. Back in ArcGIS Server Manager, you'll actually see a new data store being registered against it. But now you have this in the portal. And there's certain workflows where it's useful to share this item with other people for insights and, again, ArcGIS desktop workflows. But in this instance, what we want to show is actually from this new data store item that you've created, you can now start the process of bulk publishing from the top here. So this will iterate through all of the layers that are in that geodatabase and create service endpoints for both map image layer and feature service endpoints. You decide, okay, well, what's the folder going to be called in the portal to store the items, and what is the folder in the GIS server to store the services. Typically, you'd use the same name. And it takes around 30 to 60 seconds to publish each service. If anyone else is trying to publish during this time, they'll be queued up to wait until this process is finished. You can programmatically get access to this as well if you wanted to schedule it to happen in off-peak hours. What else can I say about this? The metadata that we saw at the beginning, that actually flows through to the item descriptions in the portal, so you don't have to sort of do any of that. That synchronized layers button is quite useful. So again, if I took some layers out of that Azure SQL or added some layers in, that synchronize would remove them from the portal or add new items in. Again, this is the metadata that's flown through, and again, the actual metadata endpoint you can access here. But as the ArcGIS Server Administrator, if we jump back into the ArcGIS Server Manager interface, we can actually see that it's made use of that new shared instance mode. So in this particular environment, it's on Azure, it's just a one machine deployment, and there's four of those special SOC processes that are sitting there dealing with these requests. So all of those services that are published here, so refreshing this, will see a new folder called Devonport, of which there should be 20 endpoints in here. All of them are using this new shared instance mode. And there's been no additional SOC processes spun up on this environment. It's just using those four special SOC processes for all of those services. Hosted feature views have been around since 10.6. So just to recap, these are views. Normally we think of views as database views and stuff, but these are actually views that you create at the portal tier. And they're a special kind of feature layer, but with more options. So view layers allow you to create a layer that shares the same data as the parent feature service that it was spawned from, but you can apply different permissions, you can apply different symbology sets, and you can apply different filters. And at 10.7, we now have this ability to define an area of interest, and it will only share the data that's within that extent. So you might have a particular project site that you want to share with a contractor and give them editor permissions for this, to collect some information around it, but not the rest of the larger area. You can do that with a view, or share a view with an external party that's just the last 10 days of incidents with read-only access around a mining site or something. Again, a view will allow you to do that. The amazing Atlas of Living Australia, just under 300,000 records of spider observations, and maybe this service is just private to me, no one else can see this. I can spawn a view from it, and then with this view, attach different metadata to it to distinguish why it's different from the parent service. In this case, it's just a specific species of spider. And then I would jump into the visualization and set up my filters. So maybe I would change the symbology from just a raw point to a nice friendly frog icon. Maybe I want to hide some of the fields that are sensitive or just irrelevant to the end user. I can just strip those out from this view as well. And then I can also apply a definition query to say, well, look, I'm only interested in spiders that were collected in the last year, or in this case, the jumping spider family. And then, in addition to that, I could then draw out an extent, or in this case, jot out an area of interest around, in this case, Perth. And then if I share this view with someone, and someone's collecting data against the parent feature service, and they collect a new spider over in Brisbane, the people will never see the view. But if you collect a spider observation over in Perth, that would then trickle through without any data replication. If you have large volumes of XY data in your database, binning will allow you to better visualize and understand trends and patterns in this data. So again, hex bins isn't new, and you might remember seeing this a couple of years ago, and from an Esri perspective, dynamic binning has been enabled at the ArcGIS Spatial Temporal Data Store. This isn't that. This is dynamic binning in just good old SQL Server or PostGIS or Oracle, whatever your flavor of database is. It doesn't even need to be an enterprise geodatabase. You do need ArcGIS Pro, so you need 2.4 and above, and it includes this new feature binning toolset. So this is just a bog standard SQL Server table that's got a geometry column in it, and it's lightning strikes down in Victoria. Enable feature binning. You decide if you want a fishnet grid or a hex bin. You should choose an equal area coordinate system, which I haven't in this video. It will create a count on those hex bins. You can create summary statistics, and maybe it's vehicle positioning data. You could get the average speed. Maybe it's earthquakes. You might take the maximum magnitude of those earthquakes. You set the bin size, you set the symbology, you set the labeling, and then just like any other layer in ArcGIS Pro, you can then have the option to publish it to the ArcGIS Enterprise, which I'm logged in as here, and ArcGIS Enterprise will respect this renderer and allow you to actually visualize this at the front end. So let's jump over. This is that lightning strike data. I can slice and dice through this data temporally, but also as I zoom in, the bin size will stay roughly the same size, but obviously the count changes each time. And eventually, if I zoom right into a particular, come on, you actually see the raw data if you get to a certain scale, which again you have control over. All right, 2 more left. Nearly there. Offline map areas allow you to pre-cook specific areas of your web maps to take offline from apps like Collector, Survey123, and also your own custom apps that you might build in ArcGIS Runtime. Now, this feature actually came about from feedback from your field users that sometimes struggled to, maybe they didn't know what levels of detail were, or what impact it would have if they just decided, I need all of Queensland right down to the street level. That's obviously going to be a lot of data. You, as the web map owner, can now take that responsibility and say, okay, well, I'm going to take my web map that has some sync-enabled services and offline-capable base map, and I can jump into the settings, enable offline mode, and there's this new option now to manage areas. So from this manage areas, you would typically pick areas that the field crews are commonly visiting. You would pick areas that have bad reception or are entirely offline, and you'd pre-cook these areas. So you'd say, all right, well, here's the areas that they visit. I'll draw out an extent around this area. I'll specify the level of detail that they need, and we understand what this is, but they might not. And maybe for some workflows they don't need that granular level, they just need a sort of strategic sort of view of the area. But this is the cool bit. You can actually say, look, ArcGIS Enterprise, cook this up every morning at 5 a.m. so that when they go out into the field, they have the latest GIS information already in that map package ready to go. So you create as many of these packages as you like. The portal does the generation of the map package. It sits in the portal tier for the end user to use. And this update interval, maybe it's every day, but maybe if it's more static data, it might just be that you cook it up maybe manually. Maybe it's like an aerial imagery data set and you just do it manually. But then for the end user, their experience is a bit easier. So they would just select the web map that they've been told to go, do some, street inventory kind of data collection. Come on. And then when they select this web map, it gives them the option, well, look, here's a couple of map packages that are ready to take offline. I'm going to Jen Osmond Park, I'll take that. And it does all that kind of downloading, and you don't have to worry about sort of setting all of those settings for you. All right, last one, but this is a good one. So a webhook is a new ArcGIS Enterprise capability that allows administrators to listen out for when specific events occur in the portal. So when these events occur, the webhook listens out, catches that, and then sends that information across to a third-party system and then does something. So as an example, a webhook could listen out for when a particular item is updated, or a new user joins your portal, or maybe someone leaves your organization and leaves the portal, or someone shares an item to a particular group, or a particular executive logs in and you want to listen to when that happens. Whatever it is, you can listen for when that happens, and then send a little payload of information to a third-party URL, and that could be Microsoft Flow, it could be if this then that, it could be your own Python or PowerShell script just sitting there on an application server ready to deal with this information and do something about it. And the something could be as simple as adding a record to a SQL Server table, updating a Power BI report, or even reaching back into the portal using the ArcGIS Python API and actually performing some sort of administration function against that item. So just to explain this, I've got 2 workflows I'd like to show you. So first one, Scenario 1. So as a portal administrator, I want to listen out from when any of my portal users share something to the front page of my portal. And I would then like to broadcast that to the rest of my organization to say, look, there's a new item on the front page, go check it out. And we could send this to Skype or to a mailing list or to Jabber or Salesforce Chat or whatever sort of comms channel you use. Microsoft Flow is going to help us do this. Second scenario is a little bit different and a little bit more elaborate. So as a more skeptical portal administrator, I want to listen out for when a user shares something to public, so actually shares it to the entire organization or, anonymous access. And we're letting people do this, but we want to catch when that happens and run a Python script to sort of just do a few checks, like have they actually applied a thumbnail? If not, try and generate one. Have they applied the relevant license? If it's been shared to an open data group, make sure that's a Creative Commons license. How many tags are there? If there's less than 2 or 3, try and crawl through the layers and grab additional tags and append them in. And if it's not to a certain bar, unshare the item and send them an email and say, look, we've got to fix these things up. We tried fixing these, but these are the things we couldn't fix. Try again. All right, so workflow number 1. The help will give you some information about how to set these up. What I want to show you is the payload. So the payload is the packet of information that gets sent to the destination system. So in this first scenario, what I'm essentially doing is listening out for when someone shares an item to the group that's used for the banner on the front page of your portal. So for that, there's a property here called Share to Groups, which actually has the group ID that it's sharing to. So I just want to listen out for when it's sharing to that front page banner. Over here, I have a webhook already pre-set up that's sending it to a Microsoft Flow that's already, I'll show you that in a sec. It's active, and it's actually a fairly high-level webhook. It's actually listening out for when anything happens to any item, just send it across to Microsoft Flow, and Microsoft Flow will do the filtering. So if you're not familiar with Microsoft Flow, you've probably got access to it, part of Office 365. There's a range of connectors for various business systems, all of the Microsoft ones as you'd expect, but maybe just updating an RSS feed or sending out a tweet. We've got a new item in our portal, go check it out. Sending out emails, whatever. There's all sorts of different connectors in here. My one, so this first one this is that destination URL that the portal is sending it to. And then down here I'm saying, okay, well, let's have a look at this payload of information. Hopefully you can see that, if the shared to groups property is this particular group that's being used on the front page of the portal, conditionally go down this path here, construct a message using the information that's in that payload, and send a message to our Microsoft Teams, and also a very similar message to our Slack workspace. Here is an item. Share. This is the group that's being used on the front page. Click OK. Come on. So this has now just triggered a webhook to send this information to here. So it's got this, let's backtrack. This is our Slack workspace that it sent a message to. And then again over in Teams, a similar one. So it's just sending messages out. So it's fairly simple, but you can sort of see how that could be useful. Second scenario. So this is the one that I think will be more relevant, and I think it's going to be very useful for a lot of governance workflows. Bear with me. All right, second one. This item isn't so good. So from a metadata perspective, we've got a score here that's very low, and the reason for that is it's missing, there's no thumbnail, there's no description, there's only one tag in here, which is an Esri tag, and it's pretty poor, but for whatever reason, the admins allow me to go crazy here and share it with everyone. So I can do that. As soon as I do that, again, I've got another webhook that's listening out for when this happens, and this time sending it to a different URL. So this URL is actually an Amazon Web Services API gateway. We're sending that information across. This is the API gateway. This could be just, Tomcat application server. It doesn't have to be Amazon. And then we've got this script here that's just listening out for that payload of information. I'm happy to walk you through the script outside the session, but it does a number of things. It looks at the thumbnail and tries to generate a new one if there's not one present. It'll loop through the tags and it'll find all of the layers that are in that web map and get the tags from that one and apply it to the main web map. It'll unshare the item if it's of a certain standard, and it does a number of things. I'm happy to share this. So, if we go back to that original item, let me just check a few things here. So my inbox I've got this new message here. Hopefully you can see that. So it sends me a message to say, look, you've just tried sharing this item, but we've discovered some problems. We have generated a new thumbnail for you. We have generated a new license, and here's what the license says. We've updated the tags based upon the layers, but there's no description and there's no snippets, which it can't really magically fix up. So if we refresh the actual item, we should see that some things it's tried to fix. So it's overlaid your company logo with the thumbnail. It's added some tags. That metadata score's got better. And maybe you could elaborate on that script and do a few more automated actions if you know a little bit about Python. I think I've probably used up most of my time, so let me just finish up with some extra resources. I'd be interested to hear from you actually on how you might want to use those webhooks for your own organization. 10.8 is out, definitely check that out. There's training as per usual from Esri Australia, but also from the Esri Learning Pathways, and there's some other useful links there. With that, we'll open up to questions before having a drink.